Welcome to We Build Great Apartment Communities, the only show dedicated to the process and strategies for transforming apartment buildings to thriving communities. I am your host, John Brackett, and welcome to the show. Hi, everybody. This is John Brackett. Welcome to We Build Great Apartment Communities. I have here a great guest and someone who I know many of you have heard out in the marketplace. I want to go as far, Gene, as saying legendary in some of the circles that I'm in.
Iconic. Iconic. Yes.
Iconic. I like that even better. But
you live this long, John. You got to do something, right?
Well, I'm going to, as we get into this, I'm going to share some stories, okay? These are recent stories. They're good. But, Gene, you've been doing syndications for quite some time. So this is going to be a tremendous conversation. It's not only a big topic now, but it's a topic that's going to be big for quite some time, especially in the market that we're currently in, because the need for capital, right, in markets that are tightening up. So very excited to have the conversation. So Eugene Trowbridge, welcome to the show. And I am going to give our audience your background. So welcome. This is going to be an exciting one on syndications. So Gene,
at least you didn't say petrified. You didn't say... Let's go. Let's hear what this bio says about
let me share the bio. Okay. So as the founding partner of Trowbridge Law Group, Gene's law practice centers around syndications of commercial and investment real estate through both debt and equity. So between Gene's individual syndication practice and firm's legal practice, the partners in the firm have written more than $5 billion of money raised. Okay. And the median offering size is roughly about $2.5 billion. His practice writes offerings under 506B and 506C of Regulation D and Regulation A. Gene, we're going to talk a little bit about that. You also were a former syndicator for the broker-dealer community. You're kind of unique, Gene, in that you can communicate with clients on both a technical and practical level around the different state and federal security laws. You're also a CCIM senior instructor. So, Gene, welcome to the show, and extremely excited to have a conversation with you.
Well, good, John. Thanks a lot. I'm glad, you read it the way I wrote it, but we really could have talked about the fact that I've had 3 careers. I was a commercial broker for a long time, and that's where I got my CCIM, and I started teaching CCIM classes. And then I went off to be a syndicator, doing my own deals. And I did that for quite a while. And then, crazy as it is, when I was 45, I went to law school and became a lawyer. So all that stuff put together makes me a mentor, along with just a guy who does paperwork, So yes, I can communicate.
A little modesty never hurt either. So, Gene, you're going to laugh. And we were talking about this a little bit. So 2 weeks ago, I was having a call with one of your good buddies, Terry Moore.
Okay.
Terry said some pretty fun things about the two of you teaching. So Terry, very animated guy, and we had a really good time. So Gene, I'm going to pivot a little bit, okay? I'm going to pivot a little bit. And let's start off with you talking a little bit about the Rule 506B and 506C, okay, of Regulation D. And then we're going to talk a little bit about Regulation A. But can you talk a little bit about the difference between the two?
What if I show you a slide?
That'll be even better with your fancy technology.
I have to get there. So we've got the securities law, started in 1933. And the issue in the securities law was that this particular law was Congress wanted full disclosure. They wanted to make sure that people who were in our business, in the syndication business, told investors all the material facts before they invested so they could make an informed decision. End of quotes. And so they created the law. And then while they were doing it, they said, there's a whole bunch of people out there who really don't need our protection. They're rich, they're smart. We can't protect everyone. So we're going to carve out something. And it's come to be known as private placement, the private placement market. And in order to carve out the private placement market, they wrote a rule called Regulation D. And Regulation D allowed people to bring securities offerings to the market without going all the way to the SEC to get them registered.
Right.
The big change in that was in 1979 when probably way before you were born. Anyhow, when I was syndicating, they came
Thank you.
and
Thanks, Gene.
they came along and said, you know what we need to do? We need to define these rich and smart people. And we need to talk about that. And we need to also open up capital formation a little bit. So they brought out this rule called Regulation D, Rule 506, period, just 506.
Right.
And that's basically what we have over here. When they started that rule.
Let me just pause for a little bit, okay? So I can share with our audience the fact that you actually have this on a very cool digital board. So for those of you that are listening, log in so that you can go to our YouTube channel, you can go to Facebook, you can even go to LinkedIn so that you can actually see what he's doing, because he has this mapped out really well so that you can see the distinctions while you're following along and listening.
Sure.
So go ahead, Gene.
Cool. So 506, 1979. 506 said, okay, you can raise as much money as you want. We're not going to put a limit on it. That was new. And then you can have an unlimited number of accredited investors. And we'll have to get to that. What is an accredited investor in a minute?
Right.
Because you're going to know all the investors, John, all they required the syndicator to do was to put in front of the investor a piece of paper, and then the investor could check the box. I'm accredited according to the definitions. And John, because you would have known all your investors, if Eugene Trowbridge had come and checked the box, you'd know enough about me to know if I was telling you the truth or not, or close to it. Okay. Self-certification, that's a big deal. And in order to open up capital formation, but minimize risk, they allowed 35 people who weren't rich and smart to be in your deal. Every deal could have 35 sophisticated investors. What's that? I don't know, just the definition. There's no bright line. A sophisticated investor, alone or with others, is smart enough to read the documents and figure out what the risk is and determine if the investment's right for them. That's really what it is. And to follow through on the disclosure rules, they require a PPM. If there's ever a sophisticated investor in your offering, you have to have a PPM. They did carve out an exception that if all your investors are accredited, you wouldn't need a PPM, but you're still responsible, John, for telling the investors everything there is to know. And the only way you can prove that you did and you told everyone the same thing,
right?
We're going to put it in writing.
Okay. Of course.
We're going to put it in writing. And then there's no advertising or solicitation. And this is where, and we're probably not going to get into it, this is where the magical words pre-existing and substantive relation came from.
Of course.
So that was fun. 79 all the way to the Jobs Act 2012. Congress got together and said, you know, why can't Eugene Trowbridge advertise to rich and smart people? We got all these rich and smart people who can only find offerings of Gene if they know Gene. And my God, there's 20% of the households in the United States that are accredited. Why can't Gene take his offerings to everyone? If everyone knew all the sponsors' offerings and all the sponsors knew all the accredited investors, we could help raise a lot of money and drive businesses. And you've got to remember, in 2012, we'd just come out of the 2008 problem. So we were looking for capital. So they just kind of cut 506 in half. And they threw a B after the old rules. And so 506B is exactly what we did forever, and we still do now. But they created 506C. And the major change in 506C is you can advertise to anyone. You can raise as much money as you want from as many accredited investors as there are, John. And because you don't need them, you're probably going to have to go through a third-party verification. The rule is that you have to take reasonable steps to assure that who invests with you is accredited. So if anyone wanted to go Google, accredited investor verification companies, there's a whole range of companies out there will do that. So if you're syndicating, John, and I want to invest with you, you'd send me over to some company and they'd ask me all these questions and they'd send you a document that says, yes, Gene's accredited. You've taken your reasonable steps. 506C, that allows you to invest, allows accredited investors to invest with any sponsor, but in limiting the risk, because we're advertising and we're taking people we don't know, no sophisticated investors.
Okay, makes sense. And I really appreciate you clarifying that. So, Gene, how has this changed from when you were syndicating, right? And then I'm going to unpack some of what you discussed. But, I know you were syndicating, you were working with broker dealers at the time, but what has the evolution looked like? Just to give our audience some context, because raising capital is a huge component of real estate. Okay. This is, I think, a great opportunity for investors out there that follow these guidelines because it opens up another path to be able to raise capital and deploy capital in a very unique way, right? Can you talk about the evolution a little bit?
Sure. Well, how it affected me way back when it was just simply 506 was that I was somewhat limited in the number of people with whom I had a pre-existing relationship. So that was a limiting factor in raising money. And so I went out to the broker-dealer community, and the broker-dealers, the registered representatives, they had in those days, Rolodex of people with whom they had a pre-existing relationship. So I basically became, we called it a wholesaler. I became a wholesaler to different companies where the registered reps had plenty of investors. So it really didn't bother me, but I was able to get in there and not everyone else was able to get in there. So that was good. Now let's talk about today. This private placement market is huge. During the last 12 months that the SEC released figures in the private placement market, John, we raised $1.8 trillion.
That's incredible.
More than Wall Street raised.
Incredible.
And John, 99% of it is raised in Rule 506. 99%. Now, it's not real estate. I was going to
ask that, yeah.
No, real estate maybe is 700-800 billion out of the 1.8 trillion, because everything, all small businesses go to the private placement market in Reg D to raise money.
Sure.
Big companies that you think about and know about have used Regulation D because there's no limit to how much you advertise. When Chrysler went from a public to a private company and formed an LLC, they used 506. Google has done some offerings as private placements in 506. So very, very popular. But I'm getting to your question.
This is great. This is fantastic.
Your question is, well, gosh, isn't everyone going to 506C? And the answer is absolutely not. 93% of the money raised in the 12 months that the SEC released their last information has been 506B. John, today I did an interview. I've got a series of interviews coming out, and I interviewed my most prolific serial syndicator, if you will. And since 2014, I've done 110 offerings with this company, and he does 506B. 110 offerings. He only accepts accredited investors. And in the last 5 years, he's never accepted a new investor. So
yeah, go ahead.
Why they do 506B is they know everyone. They've got a relationship with as many people as they want, and they're scared to death to go out and advertise and find someone who's going to screw up the works.
That was going to be my question, right? Is the reasoning for that, of course, they're pre-existing relationships, folks that they've already done business with. But it sounds like one of the main drivers is the liability associated with the advertising component.
That's the liability because it's new. And if I've been doing something for 20 years and I'm successful, maybe I won't try it. But another thing that is really in response to the investors is the investors have been going along just checking a box that they're accredited.
Interesting.
And now you don't want to go to your lifelong investors and say, I need to send your tax return over here to someone else, and they're going to question you. No, the long-term accredited investors don't want to be dissected like that. But I'll tell you, that it is growing, and I don't know where it's going to grow to, but the people in my firm who hire me to do 506C offerings are generally people who are a little newer to the business and don't have this Rolodex, this database, because you can advertise to everyone. You can put it on your website. You can do anything you want. And anyone who comes to you, you can get them into your database.
Right.
And then you can eventually,
filter.
You can't use them for this offering, but you can eventually build a relationship with them. And all my 506C people are just waiting for the day when they can come back and do 506Bs. Paperwork isn't different.
I want to clarify a couple of things on the Reg D 506C offering. Okay, so no limit on capital raised. Okay, unlimited number of accredited investors. The sponsor has to be relatively assured or reasonably assured that the folks participating are accredited. But you can't have any sophisticated investors whatsoever, unlike 506B. And you must have a PPM. And, because of the C regulations, advertising and solicitation are allowed. Now, when I see advertising and solicitation, you can advertise and solicit
any way you want.
Your PPM any way you want. Okay. So I find that really fascinating because today we're in a digital marketplace. Okay, where a great opportunity to be able to leverage technology to expose information or an offering or an opportunity. And I find it really fascinating that only 7% of offerings today go down that path. Mm-hmm. So especially with crowdfunding, I would think that inside of these crowdfunding spaces, which are becoming more and more common, that there would be a lot more than that. So that's very fascinating to me.
Yeah, that crowdfunding word, that's kind of an interesting word. In the Jobs Act, Title IV allowed for crowdfunding where the crowd could actually share in the economic benefits of what's being done. The first example of crowdfunding is when they brought the Statue of Liberty over here. The government was $125,000 short of being able to install it. And so they started advertising in newspapers and radio, and people just contributed money. The crowd contributed money, and they installed the Statue of Liberty. And in Europe, we've had crowdfunding. There's donative crowdfunding, gifting. I need a vacation. Send me some money. But not until 2012 and the Jobs Act can you crowdfund and share the profits, because that's one of the definitions of a security is that people are investing for profits and someone else is making it happen. Sure. And so they brought that in, but you can only raise, I think this year it's $1,070,000 is all you can do. You have to go to a broker dealer for a crowdfunding portal. It's not cheap. It's difficult. But the word, you go over to the 506C side and you go to CrowdStreet or Real Crowd or Realty Mogul. All those places are using the word crowdfunding in their business. It doesn't apply. It's like a synonym to syndication. And what they do very well is they build a database. You go to one of the companies I mentioned, and they might have 30,000 accredited investors in their database. And if you can take your offering to them, it's like an MLS of offerings. If you can take your offering to them and get on their platform, they dispense the information to their database. Now, John, this is the one area in the securities laws that's about to change. And the opening up of the definition of accredited investors is going to happen. It's not going to be real bright, real big opening up. But right now, they've got some proposals out there that they're looking for comments. And one of the things they're going to do is they're going to look at smart people, registered reps, registered investment advisors, maybe certified financial planners, people like that who have an education that relates to people investing in stuff. Maybe they're going to be considered accredited without worrying about the dollar and cent tag. Then there are some things in our culture that are changing. And when we look at a household, it doesn't have to be a married couple filing joint. It can be something else.
Of course.
So that's all out there, and hopefully that'll be done by the end of the year. They've been
Okay, great. So can you talk a little bit about what an accredited investor is under the current definition today?
Yes. Today, as we're talking here, you are an accredited investor if you or your family has a net worth of $1 million, not including your primary residence. Straightforward $1 million limit. Easy to define.
Right.
But I don't know anyone like you and me who has a financial statement, who keeps a financial statement typed in Word, so how do you deal with that? Or if you're a taxpayer who files a single tax return filing separately,
right,
the income level is $200,000 a year for the last couple of years and expected to continue. If you're married filing jointly, then the income level is $300,000 for the family. And that's just all there is. The only thing other than that is we get into someone investing with their IRA and an entity like a 401k or an IRA. What is that? Well, the rule is that if the entity, the family office, the trust or whatever, if the entity has $5 million worth of net worth, the entity is accredited. You don't have to worry about who the investors are at all.
What is the verification process for that? Is it an audited financial statement? Is it a balance sheet, an internally prepared balance sheet? I mean, what is the verification mechanism?
In a 506B, they can self-certify.
Interesting.
In a 506C, you have to take steps to be reasonably assured. Now, if the entity doesn't have the $5 million, then you have to look through to the investors. And maybe all the investors are accredited, but the entity doesn't have much net worth at all. That's fine. Then you can take them as individual investors being accredited. But that gets to be in trouble with things like the family offices when there are young people in the company who don't have the wherewithal.
Right.
So it's a complicated situation. Maybe they can rectify that. I know that they want to expand the number of households in the United States that are accredited. A single person is a household. So they'd like to expand that and get that up to maybe 20% of the population. And then would that make a difference? Would that make a difference if the definition of accredited were expanded in the number of people who came to me and said, let's do a 506C? But I'll just tell you, 1 out of 10 in my company is 506C. And generally it's a less experienced person. However, in the midst of COVID, I've got some experienced people who come to me who want to do blind pools as opposed to a specific property. They want to raise money because, John, they think there's going to be blood on the streets and they want to get their money ready. It's an acquisition strategy.
Right.
And so they want to go out with their track record and talk to as many people as they can and raise as much money as they can. So when it's time to buy, they've got the money and they can compete with the all cash buyers, the 1031 buyers.
Of course.
They can go to the bank. And so I wouldn't do a 506C and advertise if I didn't have a track record. You'll never raise any money.
Let's talk about that, Gene, because you've done a lot of raises over the years for a lot of different types of transactions, right? So you have a very unique perspective right now in this market, okay, because you're associated with the money. And I always say, look, if you want to know where the market is going, either go talk to the debt guys because they're preferred in most of these positions, or go talk to the folks that are doing the formations for equity. So you talked a little bit about pools right now, and you're seeing a little bit more of that, which makes sense. So is that trending up right now?
Yes.
We've already slowed down, but it sounds like, things are going to get much worse from where you sit, right?
Well, as you can tell from this, I've been around. I can't tell from you, but I can tell from me.
Well, I don't have any more hair, Gene.
I've been around through, 81 and 86 and 94 and 2008. I've been around through all these
different cycles,
slowdowns. I've seen blood in the street. And in those slowdowns, you could always kind of tell what the appropriate discount would be. You kind of could tell when we're at the bottom. I don't know. I'm not sure. And I think it's product type. In my mind, it's product type driven. I'm pretty confident in the multifamily, the mobile home park, the RV park industry. I'm confident in housing. I don't do much in retail. And it'll be interesting to see what happens in office. Because of my background in self-storage, I do a lot of self-storage offerings.
Right.
But I don't know when the blood will start and how deep will it go. But all blind pool is, John, is an acquisition strategy.
Right.
I want to get cash so I can strike. Now, I had my interview this morning with my big client, and he was talking about why he won't do a blind pool. He's done over 160 offerings and all in the same area of product type. And he says if he knows right away, if he brings out a new offering, he can call John Brackett, and John's invested in 60 deals with him. And even while he's calling, while the phone's ringing, he's writing down on his ledger, John's going to invest $50,000.
Of course.
And John invests $50,000 in every single deal. And so he could do the next 10 offerings and John would invest $50,000 every time. Or he could do a blind pool that says, I'm going to raise money for 10 properties. And John's going to invest $50,000.
Yeah. So, Gene, here's what I find kind of fascinating about where we are in today's market, right? The public is divided. I hear 50% saying, hey, things are going to go kind of as they're currently going right now. And the other portion of that opinion is that there's going to be a lot of blood in the water. But one of the great things about where you sit is not only are you putting together these syndications, but you're also being very specific about how that money can be deployed inside of your offering memorandums, inside of your documentation, right? So where is most of that money being directed now? Is it?
Well, my company is a multifamily housing company. That's our bread and butter, and that's where our client base comes. I will tell you, based on the beginning of that comment you made, that I've been in this business for a long time. The only time I've seen a slowdown in the syndication business is when you could borrow 110%. Because if you can borrow 110%, you don't need to raise money.
You don't need to
But
raise
as I've always said, if every investor out there who wants to buy their own property has 20% down and the bank is making 60% loans, you got to pull your money.
Yeah.
So my business is a little bit counter-cyclical. The tougher the lending world is out there and the more equity that needs to be raised, the more I'm in demand.
So, Gene, what are some of the big differences that you see right now in terms of just the market between the last cycle that we were in, 2008, 2009, versus, where we are today? And then we'll talk about just maybe some different strategies around capitalizing these projects, right? But I think talking about some of the big differences will shed some light on the strategy moving forward. So can you share that a little bit with our audience?
Sure. The way I look at it, there was a big purge in 2008 through 2010, a big purge of ownership in commercial real estate. And that was kind of the end of whatever that cycle was. And this new cycle started in 2010. And anyone who's bought and held from 2010 up until now,
right,
has done well. They've been a hero. And they have a lot of equity. So where does that place the properties today? It places them in one of two areas. Number one, the investors are done investing. Like me, I'm not going to go into a new property with a 10-year projected hold. At my age, I'm not going to do that. So there's a group of syndicators who are seeing their investors wanting to cash out. Okay, no question. And there's a group of investors and syndicators who see their investors want to do a 1031 exchange into the next property.
Sure.
And so that's one of the issues I see in the marketplace is there's so many 1031 buyers out there that a new syndicator really has to compete with cash and maybe has to raise the cash a little ahead of finding the property. So I think that's good. But all in all, what I've always thought, and I always felt when I was a syndicator, experienced investors invest with John.
Of course.
In our whole conversation, you and I haven't once mentioned cap rate, NOI, Okay. This is a people business. They're going to invest with John. And if John thinks we should exchange and John can find enough leg that makes sense, that's good. Now, maybe if the market gets a little uncertain and there are some bargains out there, the volume of exchange transactions will pick up because these people have all sorts of money.
Of course.
They can go in. So I'm looking for a strong 2 or 3 years here. We have a relatively new firm here, Trowbridge Law Group. After mentoring and working with other attorneys for the last 6 years, I went out and changed my plan a little bit. And I think we're looking at a good 4 or 5 years ahead of us before my new partners are ready to jump in and take over. So I'm excited. Hashtag not retiring.
At least we have a couple more years to do some work together, Gene, and have some more laughs and continue to have fun in this space. I'm going to pivot a little bit and throw something a little bit, well, maybe for you, not very unique, but something that I have explored for a couple different reasons. So and I'm asking this question from the viewpoint of other products out there that are competing or that can compete with a private placement, right? So one of them being a Delaware statutory trust, right? So that fits more into an exchange. And then also you have a Delaware sales trust.
I only know about one of those things, although I think I've heard what you're talking about. And I'm going to get myself off the hook right now. I don't do Delaware statutory trust. I don't do Delaware anything because I'm not licensed in Delaware.
Understood.
All the other stuff is federal law and I can do it everywhere. The problem with the Delaware statutory trust for my clients is most of my clients can't control a large enough property to go out to the market to a broad enough base of investors and say, bring your 1030. It's not like Pasco or one of the other companies who can, buy $40, $50 million properties and hold them long enough until the equity follows them.
Sure.
So I don't have that business. I have done PPMs for sponsors who do Delaware statutory trust, but I don't write the trust documents. And I think that Delaware sales one has something to do selling the property and timing the receipt of your cash over a number of years.
Exactly.
I mean, why is it any different than an installment sale? I don't know. I haven't studied it, but
you know what? That's a really, really good point. I mean, I was looking into that for some product that we have that I was considering for sale, looking at that as a vehicle to place cash, predominantly to buy notes moving forward. But some of the mechanics I just didn't understand, and the tax consequence didn't seem to make much sense to me. So I respectfully bowed out. But one of the things that I really like about this discussion is because now we're moving back into a place where, to your point, right, your business is counter-cyclical. So now the need to raise equity is starting to be in greater demand, right?
Especially if the lenders want 2 years of reserves,
right,
in addition to the down payment. I mean, we're wrestling with how do you deal with that in an offering? That's kind of new territory for us.
So, Gene, I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to ask a question based on that, on a deal that I just underwrote. And I was considering to place my own money in this because the projected, repayment period was relatively short. It was 10 years. So the deal was structured like this, okay? So there was a preferred equity portion that was for a very short period of time, for 12 months, with the idea being that they were going to use the reserve dollars for the
reserves.
Right. At the end of that 12-month period, that's how I was going to get paid back, right? Mm-hmm. But here is the question. How would you structure the documents? What would you write in there? Ideally, I secure my portion with the trust deed, okay? But how would you write the documents to allow
You can't do that. You can't do that because the first primary lender won't let another trust deed go.
Understood.
We're doing one right now, and we ran into that issue. It's only about $600,000, but the sponsor was willing to lend the money to the LLC for 8%. And the terms were that when the reserves were released, he'd get paid back. But
I like that better.
It was a Fannie loan, and he couldn't lend, so we made him Class B member. His Class B units don't have voting rights. He's the only Class B member. He has Class B units, and when the reserves are released, the operating agreement says that the reserves will be released to the Class B members.
Okay, got it. So that was the thought process.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was the thought process behind the structure. So I'm glad you kind of validated that.
Mm-hmm.
And so something that we may do literally next week. So
well, yeah, that's good. And one of the other problems is, how are you going to quote cash on cash when you raise $1 million and 200 doesn't go into the property? 200 has to sit there in a non-interest bearing reserve account.
Right.
And you have to quote your yield on the full $1 million.
Of course.
Not on the 8th. So I'm sure there are other ways to do it, but depending upon the lender, the first way you talked about may very well work. Let's just make a short-term loan.
Right.
We'll write the operating agreement so the company can borrow money from people who want to fund that. And it'd be a great investment for someone's IRA.
Sure.
Put your money in there and get 8, 9, 10% tax-free. And then when it pays off in a short period of time, the money goes right back to their IRA. It would be great.
Right.
But you can't always add debt behind the primary lender.
Understood. But it would be even sweeter if you get paid off and still maintain an equity position in the deal, which is why...
Well, you could do that. You could do the other way. You could say that when the B units get paid, they revert to another type of units. I have a client who has a group of investors who, with their solo 401ks, they fund his acquisition. He buys property that needs a lot of work. And so he'll go to them and he'll get everything he needs to close and acquire the property from them free and clear,
right?
And gives them a note. Okay. The LLC borrows the money from them and gives them the note. Then he goes through all the due diligence and everything he needs to know to come up with what do we need to spend for a renovation. And then he syndicates the property, bringing in new money for that equity. And these people who are note holders are going to get he pays them 12%. Typically it's a year or less. And they have a choice at the end of time to take their money plus their interest and roll it into A units.
Sure.
Right.
Conversion option.
Or if he can't pay them off in time, their debt converts to a secured first trustee.
Yeah. So I do something. Yeah, I've done something very similar and still do it. And that is I'll use a equity line of credit to bridge the equity piece and then go back and raise the capital to replace what I have in there or a portion thereof.
Well, you've got to, if you're going to be a syndicator and you bring a product to the market, you better know the day you bring the product to the market, how you're going to close.
Exactly. And that's why
assuming you haven't raised a penny yet.
Right.
When I was in the broker-dealer world, I had to show them before they signed a selling contract with me that I could close with my own money, just in case the selling process didn't go as fast as they wanted. Because when their reps sold, they wanted to get paid. They didn't want to take a chance that they're selling someone shares who's not going to close the deal. And we'll give the investors their money back, but there's no commission.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that drove me out of the business as I have. And I shouldn't use that term, but made me make the decision that I wanted to leave the business is I had X number of dollars that I used for that. My wife and we used for that. And it was demanded of me that I did larger deals.
Sure.
So I needed 2 times X. And as all great decisions, John, are made around the kitchen table.
Of course.
I came home to my wife and I said, okay, my lead broker dealer wants me to do deals that are twice as big. I'm going to have to get more staff. I'm going to have to get a bigger office. We're going to have to be a little more careful about what we do. And, Kay, dear, I think I'll go to law school. and that,
it turned out to be the right move, right?
And at that table, I never raised another penny. And
so, Gene, you actually bring up a great point, and I'm going to ask that we expand on that a little bit. So proof of funds as a syndicator can be very tricky, right? So what are some of the ways that you help your clients or that you've seen? Obviously, if you don't have all the equity to come down on a deal, you have to syndicate that. How are you proving to the broker, okay, that you have the ability to perform against that equity? The debt is easy, okay, especially if you're a sponsor that's done multiple deals and you have a track record with agencies or the agencies, or a lender that could vouch for you, right? So that gets a little easier over time, but the equity component is still a missing component, right? So can you talk
and you haven't
about
raised
that?
it, well, one of the things you have to be careful is not to commit fraud on the seller.
Right. Right.
Oh, I've got $600,000 and here's a bank statement. And actually, it's not your money because your minimum raise is $1 million and you
Right.
haven't hit $1 million yet. And so if everything closed down tomorrow, you'd have to give all the investors their money back. And you told the seller, I had all this money. That's
Right.
fraud. You're going to get sued for that. So a lot of my clients have lines of credit, have their own equity to bridge the minimum. And then I structure the offerings as well as I can so the minimum raise will let you buy the property. I don't care about getting fees,
Yeah, that's smart.
getting rebates upfront, getting all the CapEx money. We just need to go on September 4th with $1 million in escrow.
Close.
So we own the property.
Right.
And then the maximum raise, we call that a backfill. The maximum raise is there. You keep raising money to do whatever you need to do. But now you have to tell the investors who invest the $1 million that we're going to use the $1 million to buy the property. I need another $1 million to do all the rehab. If I don't get that through raising money, what are we going to do? Are we going to borrow more? The risk. And we have to explain all that. That's what a PPM is for.
That's the value of working with people that actually have done transactions, right? Instead of just writing offerings. There's a huge distinction. When you're doing business with folks, to your point, the conversation around mentorship, big difference when you're working with someone that has done deals.
Right.
Because then you can expand on the structure, okay, some of those risks that you talk about, but more importantly, how to get the deal done, right?
Yeah, I had
what to focus on.
When I was syndicating, I had to burn through, I would imagine, 5 different attorneys at different law firms to find one that I could educate, at least have enough real
Gene, I can't do that anymore. I can't spend my money like training people.
No, but I had to do it.
I can't do that anymore.
So no, and that's the case. So I think that's what I bring with me to the market. All your listeners are falling asleep. We've been going on forever.
Well, this has been a tremendous conversation. We're at the end of the show, but I can tell you this, that being able to give our audience a combination of what these offerings actually look like from a legal standpoint, right, into definitions, and then giving them a couple different scenarios through which how they can be applied, which you've done really well, I think is huge. Because most of the time when I get into these conversations, it's a whiteboard, right? We're just going through the definitions and, what this means versus what that means, but never really an in-depth conversation with a couple different deal scenarios like we've done now. And so it adds a lot of context. Please. Let me promote myself if I can get back here. Please do. And so, Gene, talk a little bit about your book, though, and how people can get a hold of you.
Okay, my book is on Amazon under Eugene Trowbridge. It's called A Whole New Business. Here it is, right here. Not that, John, I have any ego. If you look at the cover, we're not sure. We're not hiding who the author is. But anyhow, that's my book. It's about $24. And if 2 of your viewers buy it, I can retire.
All right. Well, I'll be one of them. How's that? I'll be one of them to buy.
And so that's good. And then our website, you can find me basically at the website. And we're everywhere that you are. We're Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever. We have a YouTube channel. Fine.
All right. Well, Gene, you've been a tremendous guest. Very great.
Bring me back, John. I'm not letting you off this early. I've got 2 topics that are hot.
Okay. Can you share what those topics are?
Sure.
I know you're keeping me on the hook.
No. And a month from now, when you want to, enough time has elapsed and you want to bring me back, I've got a great topic that's titled the 3 words: sophisticated, pre-existing, and substitute.
Interesting.
And that's all about 506B. That's everything that everyone needs to know. And then I've got another one called Sell the Sizzle. What I put together and what I learned and how I learned how to sell my offerings. And today, John, my last comment is I probably need to change that title, although I love the title.
I like the sizzle.
I try not to use the word sell. I try to get my clients to be in the mind that what they're doing is they're out there finding an opportunity, finding a problem that needs to be solved.
For sure.
And in finding this opportunity, taking the opportunity to other people and letting other people share in the results of solving the problem and the opportunity.
Yeah.
And selling is the last. You don't need to sell.
If you're presenting the right way, right? If you're presenting the right way.
Right. So it's hot here in Southern California. It's hot up in Orange County. It's been a killer over the last 3 or 4 days.
Yes, it has. It's here. Same thing. We're going through a little heat wave here. A perfect topic to talk about selling the sizzle, right? Right now, I'm literally sizzling in my office.
Right.
But that would be a great topic, Gene. I'm going to invite you back on. We're going to talk about selling the sizzle because that's a big one. It's one thing to be able to put together offerings. It's another to be able to sell the deal and get it closed.
Right.
And that's a huge topic, great conversation. So you've been extraordinarily gracious with your time. Very excited always to have you on the show. And so I am going to wrap up here. Gene, thank you so much for joining. Our purpose here is to build out great communities and find ways to improve how people live. Of course, we use real estate to do that. You have been tremendous today with describing to us different ways to be able to leverage private placements, to be able to raise capital and do that legally. Okay. And especially in this market where equity is going to be in greater demand because leverage is going to be much less, or loan to value requirements are going to go down instead of up. Your services and private placements are going to be in much greater demand. So to be able to reach out to us, folks, and connect with us, you can subscribe to Apple Podcasts, to Spotify, and also you can connect with me on LinkedIn. My name is John Brackett. To be able to hear this show again, you can also check out the show notes at the bottom of the show to be able to access not only Gene's information and how to get a hold of Gene. We're going to add all that to the show notes and our content, but you can also access us on Instagram and YouTube as well. So Gene, we have all the bases covered. You're going to be detailed in the show notes so people know how to get a hold of you.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. I'll talk to you later and say hi to Terry when you see him next week, Terry and his wife, okay?
I sure will. Stay out of trouble, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
Clarity of purpose creates our greatest competitive advantage. When we transform apartment buildings to thriving communities, we improve how people live and create assets with high profit margins. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this up with a friend. I'm John Brackett, bringing you things you can implement right away.